So what is it exactly when you live someplace that feels like it's cruising even though you're not on a boat? Hi, I'm Nika Waters and welcome to the Boat Galley podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about 5 ways that this little town in Vermont where we spend a chunk of our summers is actually pretty close to the cruising life. Today's episode of the Boat Galley podcast is sponsored by Infinity, the most trusted name in woven vinyl flooring in the marine industry. Since 2008, Infinity has offered boat owners premier flooring options proven to withstand even the most demanding environments. Each of their products is equipped with UV-stable fade resistance and antimicrobial technology, giving them both durability and style that can't be matched. Thinking about kicking carpet to the curb? Make the switch to Infinity and see the difference true luxury makes. Visit infinitylwv.com and use the coupon code GALLEY for 10% off any single area rug. So for those of you who've been following the podcast for a while, you may know that we have a house in Vermont that we've spent a lot of time this summer working on. And I had a number of people ask me, why is it, or why do you consider everything cruising prep when you're talking about putting in things like sliding glass doors or working on attic rafters? Well, besides the fairly obvious, in my mind, thing that actually anything that you do while you're leading up to going cruising is actually in many ways cruising prep, regardless of whether it's hands-on work on the boat or not, because there's an awful lot that you have to do to even be able to get to be able to work on the boat, to be able to go cruising in the first place. But the special thing about Vermont that I just want to share with you, and 5 ways that I feel like our life in Vermont is so close to what cruising is like, it's a little bit amusing to think about, because up there, we're totally landlocked. Well, except for the lake that we're on, but it's a glacier lake. We can't bring the boat up and use it on that lake at all. Living in Vermont for the summer, to me, it felt a lot like being on a boat that never moves, except we didn't need to worry about anything like anchors dragging or someone even dragging into us. So one way is project creep. Any boat project that you have that you take on will absolutely, invariably, inevitably lead to other projects. For us right now, as we're working on the boat, we're removing, destroying, and dismantling part of the quarter berth, actually, say 95% of the quarter berth. Well, in order to get out a single shelf that went against the hull, we actually needed to get into removing the wiring, which in order to remove the wiring, because we're going to wind up removing the batteries, it meant that we had to winterize the engine maybe weeks before we might have thought about doing that in the first place. It's all project creep. And up in Vermont, we had the same thing happen. The very first week that we were there, in fact, I think he started doing it the day we got up there in June, he replaced all of the plumbing feed lines in the house. And as he was down in the basement, hooking up the new lines to the well accumulator tank, that accumulator tank literally fell down. Like it was being held up onto the beams and the joists. It was hanging up there with rusted hangers, and the hangers gave way right when he was down there. So that necessitated a quick trip to the hardware store to get cinder blocks, as well as making sure that the tank was sitting upright as opposed to being supported by rusting hangers up on the joists. And then when he tested that new plumbing, the cast iron drain pipe for the sink in the bathroom that we're using, it crumbled. Project creep. Lots of things lead to lots more things. That's just like life on a boat. Number 2, sunsets. I just adore the fact that when we're cruising, we take the time to sit and honor and just enjoy the sunset every night. We stop, we slow down, we look at what's out there and what we're surrounded by. Generally, there's gratitude. Right now, as it's Thanksgiving time in the States, we're coming up on kind of high gratitude season. But I love that we do that almost every single night when we're cruising. And the thing is, up in Vermont, We do it up there too. We either hop in a kayak or we hop into a car and drive to the mountain that's 5 minutes away where we've got a much better view looking out to the west to the sunset. We celebrate the sunset every night. That's kind of a cool thing that we don't do in our regular life. And I don't know why we don't, but we don't. Number 3, the idea of what people think against what really is. So people might think on a boat that you're doing all this amazing things and that everything is just sunsets and umbrella beach drinks. It's one of the things that I talk about, is that people have this myth and this idea that cruising is all beaches and umbrella drinks. Well, up at the lake, so I started my day with a wonderful dip in the lake, wrapped myself in a towel to come back to the deck to get back to the house, dried off on the porch, listening to the loons call, got my coffee. That's the perfect beaches and umbrellas situation, right? And then right after I finished my coffee, I went back down to the lakeside, to the rock that I go into the lake from, and I took a scrub brush because I needed to take care of all the disgusting, huge amounts of green goose poop that mostly I'd managed to avoid on my way into the lake and out of it. So there's the what people like to think, and then there's the reality. And there is magic in all of those little moments, and then there's also the stuff that nobody wants to think about. Yeah, Vermont's like cruising in that way. Number 4, the slowing down of time. Jeremy and I were talking about this the other day, saying that as we think about when things need to pay out and bills that need to be paid, we'd like to set that stuff up now, while the idea of time and being bound to a calendar is a part of our daily life. And when we go cruising, it's not that we're not aware of time and the calendar, but it's much less specific and grounded in those hard dates. And cruising to me is expansive in terms of time. It means that if I'm doing an errand and coming back and I see people waving on boats, I can stop and pause and say hello. Now, there are times when you can't do that, right? If I need to make sure that I'm back at the boat to pull up the anchor by a certain time because we need to hit the current just right to get through a pass. But most of the time, the amount of time that you have is a little flexible and it's a little bit elastic. And in Vermont, if somebody walks past while I'm watering the garden, I can stop and have a chat. If we're out on the kayaks watching the sunset and we run into some other people, we can spend time drifting and chatting. Dinner can be a little bit late. That's fine. There's nothing set in terms of have to meet this schedule, have to meet that exact timing for somebody else. And number 5, this is a big one. What the heck does square mean? When you're working on a project on the boat, boat interiors are notoriously not square. You have to measure, adjust. Everything is relative to everything else, and there's very little that's square or even really symmetrical. It's best to build your cabinets, your bulkheads, your whatever it is in place. Or at the very least, you want to make sure that the last fittings and the last little things are done in place. It would be really difficult on a boat to lift measurements and build cabinets or bulkheads or something totally away from the boat and come back in expecting to fit it in perfectly. Well, when Jeremy started working on the OPO, he figured he would have a whole lot of an easier time with a house, right? It's a house, it should be square, it doesn't move. Well, that's not exactly true. Between the shifting foundation and the swelling wood and the different humidities at different times a year, plus the fact that the house was built in many different varieties since it was built initially in the late 1800s, there's absolutely nothing square about the house in Vermont. So we spent the summer in Vermont, and on the surface, that doesn't look like it has anything to do with cruising. But there are a lot of things that were similar to the cruising life, and maybe that's just one reason why we love being up in Vermont as much as we do. If we can't be on the boat, we might as well be somewhere that reminds us as close to being on the boat as it can get. In any case, I'm looking forward to seeing you out there so we can trade all of our stories about what cruising is like for us. Thanks so much for listening to the Boat Galley podcast, and thank you so much to our sponsor, InfinityLWV.com. Remember that we have a new episode that comes out twice every week. Give us a listen, share with your friends, and we'd love to hear any conversations or any things that you would like us to cover in an upcoming podcast. The links to our emails are in the show notes. Have a most spectacular week.